Welcome to the Global Missions Podcast, a show for Christ followers who want to participate more effectively in God's work, both at home and to the ends of the earth. Visit us at globalmissionspodcast.com to find show notes, resources, and previous episodes. And now, here's your host, Rob Magwood, better known to many friends as Mags.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's program. Last October, we released an episode, number 117, with Valerie Williams about how churches can care for TCKs when they go on home service or furlough. We'll talk about that term in just a minute. During today's episode, we're going to talk again about how churches can care for missionary kids at another stage of life, when they transition to college or university or otherwise into their adult world, usually in their parents' home country. We'll hear why this transition can be such a challenge for MKs, and we'll suggest some practical ways that churches can care for these precious young people as they navigate this transition. Just as we start, I'd like to make a brief clarification about terminology. Missionary kids refers to those special children who have been specifically part of a missionary family following the call of God to serve. They have been purposely placed by the Lord to be Christian workers in some part of the world. And this contributes to that child's view of ministry, of the church, and even of God himself. The term TCK, or third culture kid, is a broader term and refers to all kids who grew up, might include children of military families or business families or diplomats as well. So just wanted to mention that you'll hear both terms throughout this episode. Our guest today is Teena Embaugh, who was born in Canton, Ohio, but she spent most of her childhood in Indonesia, where her parents served as mission workers. She returned to the U.S. for college, where she completed her nursing and Bible training, and then she joined Send International in 1998 and served in Macedonia on a church planting team. Since 2008, she has been Send International's MK Care Coordinator, and she loves equipping and supporting missionary families as they follow the Lord's calling in their lives. Teena, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, just as we begin recording, I want to say in disclosure that Teena and I work happily for the same mission organization, Send, and Teena has been part of the member care to our family and particularly to our kids, and so she is much loved at our house. We love you, Teena.
Thank you. The feeling is mutual.
Our boys in particular have benefited from Teena's ministry as she has cared for them. So with that kind of as a backdrop, Teena, how did you become passionate about helping MKs and their families?
Well, I think the fact that I grew up as an MK and had an opportunity to experience all that entails, good and bad. And I also had the opportunity to see many of my peers who, when they came back to the States especially, really struggled, went through a lot of very physical issues and mental and emotional hard times trying to adjust to living back in this place that didn't feel like home, but was supposed to. So when I was coming back from the field and knew that I wanted to continue on in ministry with Send, I looked for an opportunity that I could work with our MKs to figure out how we could both help prepare them for the field, but also care for them when they came back and helping them through that transition process.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is one of the main goals of this episode is to help our churches, our sending churches, grow in their sensitivity and understanding to some of the things that these precious kids face. And when they are greeted at the sending church and that church well-intentioned says, "Welcome home," that's a very complex reality for these kids. And we just want to unpack that with Teena's help today. So looking forward to this, Teena. Let's begin just simply by saying, what are some of the challenges that MKs experience when they transition from wherever they've grown up and into college, maybe in their parents' passport country?
I think all kids, they're going from high school to college and going from childhood into adulthood. All of those things are going to be across the board for all kids. The difference would be is that when the MKs come back, they oftentimes are feeling like they're being forced into coming back to this country to go to school. It does not feel like home. Like you mentioned earlier, this is their parents' home and there are things they probably appreciate about it, but it does not feel like home. So beyond moving out and going and getting adjusted to college life and figuring out how to make decisions for themselves about classes and bedtime and what they eat and all of those things, is also the fact that they can't fall back on, I had a really bad week. I'm going to pick up the phone and call my parents right now when I need to talk to them. Sometimes the hour differences just make that impossible. They can't just decide to go home for the weekend and get some of mom's home cooking and get laundry done and feel at home again. So all of those things, they are much, much further away from home. And so they're adjusting to both college life culture, but also a whole new country culture.
Well, as we said, our goal today is to help sensitize our churches, and Teena's going to share some ways that we who are in sending churches can help MKs as they navigate through this massive transition into their college years. So we haven't numbered these, but we've got a bit of a list. Teena, just let's begin with the first suggestion you have for churches.
The first suggestion I have is that you need to start building a connection before they go to college. I think it's important to remember that when you're supporting, as a sending church, you're supporting a family on the field. You need to realize that supporting those kids is part of supporting, their parents. And there's a lot of missionaries that end up coming back from the field when their kids get to college age because they don't know or feel like comfortable that they have the resources back here to be a support to their kids. And they don't feel comfortable just leaving them go. So if they knew that they had a strong base in their home church or their sending churches, that would be a huge ministry to those missionaries. Make the effort to talk to the kids, to get to know them, to know what's going on in their lives and their interests and things like that before you're all of a sudden they're here and they don't have a choice.
Now, you mentioned getting to know a kid and some of the things they might be interested in. Do you have some practical ways that you would suggest to a church, ways that they could go about building this connection before a kid comes home from college?
I mean, you could do it formally and send them, make up a little form and send it to them and ask them to fill it out before they come back. But even just being intentional during the times that they are back on home service, talking to the youth group leaders, talking to the Sunday school teachers, and helping them to understand how to reach out to the kids and just ask questions about what it feels like to be back, to not make assumptions, because you already mentioned this earlier. The common thing is, isn't it great to be home? And the kids don't want to be rude, but it isn't. For them, this is someplace they have to come and they're going to get through it until they can go back to where it feels like home. And eventually, when they come here for college, they feel like they're not sure where they belong anymore because things keep changing and they don't feel like they totally fit in either world. So they're still trying to figure out all of that. So letting them tell you what's important to them, what's fun about being back, what's hard about being back, and letting them be honest in that way is important. I think it's also important to recognize that these kids have unique gifts just like other kids within the church. But please, please don't hold them up on a pedestal and have expectations of what you expect from them and their behavior. This happens to preachers' kids as well. They get held up to a certain standard, and these kids are very good at putting on a mask and being what they're supposed to be when they're supposed to be it. But if you don't let them be real, you're not going to really get to know the real person there.
Wow, this is really good advice. You can speak caution to us in this way because many of these kids, Teena. Are there things that churches typically do that you would caution them on? Like, please don't do this, for example. You might have seen.
What I'm thinking of specifically is, don't pull them up and say, we're going to make them a youth group leader, or stand them up in front of church and have them share when they come back. Just like all people, there are some kids who feel really comfortable doing that. There are other kids that would just completely overwhelm them. They're trying to blend in. That's really important to them. And by putting them up front like that, you've just put them out in the most uncomfortable position. So I think talking to them individually before you ask them to do something that's publicly going to make them stand out. Also, remember, just because these kids grew up as missionary kids on the mission field, they may know the scripture very well. They have memorized it. They've heard it their entire lives, but they may not have ever made a personal decision to follow Christ for themselves. So you can't assume that these kids are coming back with really strong relationships with Christ. You just need to have that in the back of your mind as you're working with these kids.
Very helpful to help adjust and set our expectations. Teena, many of our listeners serve on missions committees, and I wonder if you'd comment on what role a missions committee, or sometimes they're called missions teams now, what role do they have in building that connection to the MK and coordinating the church's efforts?
I think they need to be the motivators for that, the reminders, because otherwise the kids will pop into youth group or Sunday school classes or the college age group, and people just may not see the significance of that or why that's a big deal for them to even be there. So I think just communicating within to the other people within the church who are going to be working with them, that needs to come from the missions committee. They need to be the ones that are aware of who's coming and who's going and kind of what's going on so that they can be the motivators and communicators.
To keep it intentional, in other words, and to keep it coordinated.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. I'm glad that we're talking about missions committees just for a minute, because I think it's possible that missions committees who are from another city could be drawn into this. In other words, if a kid comes home, their parents may be from Canton, Ohio, but they may study in another city where the home church isn't really close either. It could be an entirely new context where a missions committee of a caring church really could minister to kids.
Yeah, and sometimes these kids will be open about that to whatever churches they start attending, and sometimes they won't.
Right, right. And as they seek to blend in and not be maybe no special attention at all. Yeah, yeah. Well, let's assume that we've set the stage in a healthy way. We've got some connectivity with an MK before they go to college. What are some practical ways now that churches really can lean into this when an MK begins to and gets into college?
I think one of the things, and this kind of overlaps a little bit with before they go to college and as they're going in, but something that is really very helpful for these kids as they come back is to go through some kind of a transition or reentry program. And that is a very practical way that a church could be helpful to a family and maybe even offering to sponsor that. The cost of those can be anywhere from $500 to $1,500, depending on where they go and the length of the program. But there are some excellent programs out there that will be really helpful for them, and that could be a very practical way to help them get their feet on the ground in a really good way.
Along these lines, I'd like to mention way back in season number 1, episode 11, we had Paul Dyke talk to us about how we can support missionary kids. And Paul Dyke and the organization that he serves with, the More Network, helps coordinate a retreat for MKs. This is in Canada now, but in the resources, we're going to get Teena to include other suggestions she has along this line. A reentry workshop, so to speak, or retreat for MKs. Teena, what are some other things that will help our churches minister to MKs?
I think if you even have someone from the church who has a heart for this or who has maybe a good connection with the family, the missionary family, and has supported or known them for a long time, if they can be kind of assigned as the liaison to intentionally reach out and keep in touch with those kids, visit them on campus, just see kind of, parents can't go when they have parent weekends. That's one of the hard things for these kids is their families aren't there to come. And if they have somebody else that can kind of stand in for that, sometimes aunts and uncles or grandparents, if they're in the area, can come. But if there's a church member who could do that too, that's very meaningful to these kids.
Well, along those lines, I hope that a missions committee might really be helpful here, because if there is no family in the immediate area, there could be folks who would really fit that role well and care and love on some kids. It's a great idea for the way churches could care for MKs. I'll let you go on, Teena.
Okay. Cards on the birthdays. Maybe even like include a little gift card to a office supply store or to coffee shops or things like that. That just it's something that make them know that you're thinking of them and that they can use. Care packages. Just sending in, just like you would any other college student, just little care packages that let them know that people are thinking about them and that they can enjoy there. Send them emails, be in touch with them on social media, different whatever platforms that they're on. There's all of them out there, and the kids are kind of spread out across all of them. But if there's one that you're on and comfortable using, see if you can reach out and contact them and just be in touch with them in that way as well.
Okay, so we want to stay in touch using social media and maybe email if the kids still remember what email is.
Right. Email is a lot less often, although they all have to have an email address with university because so much communication goes on from there. So it is one way that they will check their email because of schoolwork. So sometimes that's a way you can get a hold of them.
Good, good. Okay, you mentioned care packages. What other practical ideas do you have around that?
Sometimes the care packages, you might want to find out specifically what they need. If they do not have a car and they're at school, they can do what all college students do is find a friend that has one. But even financially, sometimes the way that their money is set up, and if they've got a credit card from their parents and things like that, things are really tight. And so it could be just even basic stuff, that they need. And a gift card to Target is going to be really helpful, or Walmart or whatever, that they can just go and get basic needs, laundry soap and those kinds of things. So if you are in communication with them, you can ask them some of those things, what's going to be most helpful.
Now, some of them may not even be that familiar with what culture is like here. When they first arrived to a big city, our son studied in Chicago and moved into the big city. Well, he'd already lived in North America for a while, so he was used to that. But some of these kids may be coming from another part of the world entirely and maybe not used to living in a big city, right?
Correct. So even figuring out how to get around and get what they need, if they haven't come back until right before they start college, which is what happens sometimes, they might not even have a driver's license yet. So even practical things of taking them out, and letting them drive your car to get the hours that they need to be able to get there to apply for their driver's license, simple things like that can be very helpful. If they've been in a lot of countries, you're not allowed to pump your own gas. So learning how to even pump gas in your car, mow the lawn. These are things that a lot of these kids have never done because of the situations where they lived overseas. And in this culture, in North American culture, those are things that kids learn how to do from early on in their early teen years. And so it makes them feel very out of place that they don't know how to negotiate around what things are considered normal here. So just even some basic stuff like that is very helpful.
Right. It's a great word. I would want to add to that too, that in the place of mowing the grass or pumping their own gas, by the way, these kids have other skills, and it's not like they haven't learned to do anything. They are almost adults, but they haven't been in this context, and they're not little kids either, right?
No, exactly. And yeah, that's the part that some people don't understand is they think of that and they go, "Oh, what's wrong with these kids?" That they don't know this stuff. They are very good at other skills that your kids would never know how to do because they haven't done them their whole lives. And these kids can negotiate all of those very well. They're not little kids. They're coming in as semi-adults. They just need to learn the skills that are current to the setting where they're now living. They need to have permission to adjust to this culture like they have everywhere else they go. That's what's hardest about settling back into your passport country is that people don't give you the freedom to be the foreigner coming in and learning the skills that you need in this new culture because they expect you to come back and just you look like you fit in, and so they have this expectation that you do.
This is great insight for us to help us be sensitive to this. I remember visiting with an adult who was an MK, grew up in the same part of the world that Teena did, actually, Southeast Asia. And he knew how to fell a tree and turn it into a canoe so that he could travel down the river for several days and live on whatever was available in the bush for several years. He has all these skills, but he didn't need those in Chicago when he got there. And so they're highly capable kids, young people, young adults, and treating them as such will really honor them. Okay. In a few minutes, we're going to ask Teena to share some more ideas for churches, including how you can help college students when they are on a break from their college studies. Just before we get to that part of the conversation, we'd like to share with you this resource that we hope will be helpful to you and your church.
Did you know that billions of people still haven't heard the gospel? Send International is a global movement of Jesus followers making disciples among the unreached. We've helped hundreds of churches and mission workers engage the unreached with the life-changing message of Jesus. To explore how Send can help you engage the unreached, visit send.org today. And now, back to today's conversation.
Okay, we are back with Teena Embaugh, who is the MK coordinator for Send International, and she's sharing with us some practical ideas about helping students while they are studying in their college years or transitioning back home for those years. Before we get to breaks, Teena, anything else you'd like to mention?
Just a couple other things. These are very practical ways. One of the things that could be helpful is adding the MK to your phone plan. Sometimes that's a difficult thing when families come back, they're trying to get their kids set up with a cell phone, and it's really expensive because they're an individual on this plan. And if they could get added in on another family plan, that would be really just a very practical way to help them. And then loaning a car. If you have an extra car, if you could figure out a way that the insurance can be covered and expenses and things like that, and just providing a loaner car for them for a while until they can get their feet on the ground and make enough money to get a car, that is also a very practical way to be helpful.
Super. Some great ideas. Now, what about when students have breaks? This could be Christmas break, it could be spring break or March break, as it's called, maybe even summertime, but they're not in class and they're far away from where they're used to being. What are some ways that churches can help MK students?
Invite them to come and spend it with you. I experienced this myself. There was a family from my parents' our sending church who invited me to come and stay with them. Anytime I had a break, I had a place to go. I could sleep in, I could get the rest I needed, but they just invited me and enveloped me into their family. I celebrated the holiday with them, ate the meals with them. They just took me in as part of their family. And that was so encouraging to both me and to my family. My parents were so encouraged knowing that their kids that were back in the States had a place to go. So a lot of these kids, they'll stay on campus over short holiday breaks because they have nowhere to go. So if people were willing to just invite them in and have them just come and share whatever their family does, that's a huge blessing.
It's a great idea. And I'm sure I feel like I want to call the church right now and say, do we have any MKs coming back so that we can make sure that we take really great care of them this way?
Mm-hmm.
Great ideas. Now, how about some of the longer breaks? Okay, summertime is coming and they're going to be out of school for a while. Ideas for this?
If you are an employer that could offer a part-time job or even a summer job, that would be a huge blessing for them. Most of them need to work at least part-time. A lot of them work on campus or around the schools during the year, but they need something more full-time during the summer so they can save up some money. So if you are able to offer that, that's a big resource for them. That's very helpful. Providing a place to stay for the summer. If you have extra room, and they can stay there and have a home base to go from and work, that's also very, very helpful. Providing transportation to help them get to maybe extended family. Maybe there's extended family that would have them come and stay, but they don't have a way to get to them. So those are some very practical ways that you can be helpful to them.
Well, just as we begin to wrap up, Teena, I've got a couple of final questions. I wonder if you have an example in your mind that you could share with us that really went well. A story where a church, maybe not perfectly, but they really did a great job of serving and loving an MK during these college years.
Sure, there are a couple examples, but one in particular, it wasn't even the sending church that was able to step up and do this, but it was a church that was located in an area where they were used to international students coming. And one of our MKs attended that university there and got involved at that church. And they ended up providing an internship for that student. And they were able to do a couple of their required internships from school in their local church there. They provided a loaner car so that they could get back and forth to do the ministry that they had provided for them. They just really enveloped them. They were very intentional about seeking out opportunities and ways that they could support this particular MK. And at one point, they even had she ended up having an accident with the car that she was driving, and they just came around and supported her through that process as well. So it was a great example of a church that just kind of took her in, intentionally looked out for her and her needs, and was a huge encouragement to both her, to me as to the MK worker looking out for her, and to her family.
Way to go. Way to go. Well, some great ideas here. And I know that Teena has prepared a list of resources. She's got a bunch of things to suggest. In just a second, Teena, I'm going to ask you to give us some highlights there. But I just wanted to mention this list. We will include it in the show notes. If you'd like to visit globalmissionspodcast.com for this episode, you will find that list of resources recommended by Teena in those show notes. But Teena, what are some highlights that you would like to mention to us right now?
On the list that I gave you, I have some books that are specifically just about TCKs and understanding them a little bit better. If you really have someone that would like to understand them more, I've got about 3 or 4 books there. One of them is called Third Culture Kids: The Experience of Growing Up Among Worlds, and it's kind of considered one of the, like, almost the Bible of third culture kids, written by David C. Pollock, Ruth E. Van Recken, and then on the 3rd edition that came out in 2009, Michael Pollock, the son of David. They added in a lot of stuff to kind of bring it more up to speed to modern times, because the original book was from the 90s. But it's got a lot of information if you want to understand TCKs. And there are 2 other books there that do that as well, including one that was written by a counselor who, if you have people that are doing counseling or supportive ministries with the kids, with the MKs, it gives insight into counseling the globally mobile kids. And it's one of the few books out there that will give you that kind of information. It's called Belonging Everywhere and Nowhere, written by Lois J. Bashong. There's also some books on there about transitions, just to give people an idea of what it's like for them to transition from living in one place to another. There's 2 books there for that. One of them called Reentry: Making the Transition from Missions to Life at Home by Peter Jordan. And then the other one is Burn Up or Splash Down: Surviving the Culture Shock of Reentry. And I think just even being able to go through these a little bit, it's going to give people much more of an idea of what it's like for these MKs as they come back.
Are there particular websites that you would mention?
For information regarding those transition programs or the reentry programs, the MORE network that you refer to, I would also suggest in the US, the Barnabas.org. They run 2 transition programs, one that happens in Cedarville, Ohio, and one that happens out at Biola in California. Those are very good programs that I would highly recommend, and you can go to their website, barnabas.org, and find out all the information for those. There's a tck.org website, and then there's a bunch of material that Michelle Phoenix has put out, and her website is just her name, michellephoenix.com, and that she has done extensive writing and seminars and programs and stuff for MKs, TCKs. So there's a wealth of resources there as well.
Well, thank you for mentioning that again. It's quite a list, and that will be in the show notes that you can find on the website. Teena, if any of our listeners would like to reach out to you to maybe ask you a particular question or to ask for your insight or counsel, how could they do that?
They can reach me at my email, which is just tembaugh@send.org. They're also welcome to call me. I don't mind getting text or phone calls. My phone number is 330-428-5376, and that is in the U.S.
And it is in the Eastern time zone, right?
Eastern time zone, correct.
Very good. Well, thank you for being generous and being open to hearing from folks that way. Well, last question. Teena, if you had the opportunity to stand in front of a group that was comprised of mission committee members and pastors, church leaders, and you had a chance to address them on this topic, to encourage them and to advise them respectfully, what would you want to say to them?
I would first want to say thank you for the opportunity, because I think so many of them don't recognize the need, how important this is to the missionary families. They oftentimes are looking at how they can serve the parents, but not understanding that a big way they can serve those parents and enable them to stay effectively ministering on the field is by supporting those kids and not forgetting them. I know it made all the difference for my parents, knowing that there were people back here looking out for their kids and providing places for them to feel at home and be at home when they were so far away. So I think I would say thank you, first of all. Secondly, I would say please don't underestimate how important this is. We lose so many families from the field because of MK, TCK related concerns, especially at the time during transition between coming back and starting to attend university or college in their passport countries. And so if you can step up right at that time and find ways to be an encouragement and to support to help that transition go smoothly, you are effectively helping people hear the gospel in that country where their parents serve. I think you just have to understand it. It is part of the Great Commission, is looking after those kids as well.
Well, thank you, Teena, for spending this time with us today and sharing some of your experience and your wisdom, your advice with our listeners. May the Lord bless you as you continue to serve directly in your organization and the kids you have, and encourage your heart as you serve the Lord in this way.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, we hope you found this episode encouraging and full of fresh ideas. We do encourage you to check out those resources that are mentioned throughout the podcast. The links, of course, are all in the show notes. This episode has been brought to you by the Global Missions Toolbox and produced by Send International in collaboration with other like-minded agencies. Thanks for listening, and we invite you to join us again in 2 weeks when we'll continue to explore this grand adventure of being Christ's witnesses to the ends of the earth.